such a treat. I know you've probably always been familiar with all those names, Lower Carbon Capital, Congruent Venture, and Third Sphere, but today we have really the privilege of having three of the speakers. So welcome Stanley Blue, co-founder and managing partner at Third Sphere, Clea, who's a partner and head of science at Lower Carbon Capital, and then Abe Yokell, who's also co-founder and general partner at Congruent Venture. So I know we don't present your funds, but today I think we should, because we have a lot of newcomers. Just this event was designed to really educate, inspire, and connect people who want to make the transition. As we explained, a lot of people are coming from tech, so also I think it's really important for all of us to get the context and get a little bit in your mind. So maybe going around the room, starting with Stanley, I was hoping you could do a little bit on the background of your fund and what's your specialties, but also we want to send the people behind the fund. So hear from you what got you to be a climate VC today. Stanley.
Thank you, Vero, and thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much one and the same, like what the fund is and what my personal story of why climate are very tied together. I like many of you, wanted to align my career, my life journey, and my success to actually solving a big problem. And climate was obviously one of the bigger things to work on that would have a massive impact. And I also, this is going back more than 10 years ago after I had sold my last startup, I saw it as an entrepreneur as a big open window of opportunity, mostly because there was so much confusion still and fear. And so when we started Third Sphere, at that time, Urban Us, we intentionally, in fact, focused on a messaging that did its very best to avoid talking about climate while still targeting climate action. And part of that is at the core of like our pragmatic approach. We sort of want to focus on solving a real problem and capturing opportunity in that, and prioritizing supporting founders and getting them the resources that they need, identifying them early, and helping the best solutions scale. And that came with sort of cutting all the rest of the fat and the distractions. And it meant focusing on urban sustainability and resilience at first. We covered a lot of territory over those first 5 years. And then we evolved to expand more broadly through climate and became Third Sphere. We're still focused on pre-seed and seed, where we think we can be the most impactful and helpful to founders, where we can identify solutions that others haven't discovered or helped unlock yet. So that's who we are.
Wonderful, thank you. Clea.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having me next to two great partners in Climate VC. I never thought I was going to be a venture capitalist. Climate was always a North Star. It's cheesy, but I knew early on, I guess, with parents in economic development, that actually climate and energy access were going to be the two things that would screw all of their work over, really. So I decided to go rack up a couple of degrees. I'm a chemical engineer, did my PhD on carbon capture and storage, which was really a way for me to see how energy systems work and what some of the tools for decarbonization would be in light of the climate crisis. I was based in the UK. I came over to the US, to sunny California, with palm trees at Stanford, and lots of blissful things, and mainly a government, at least in the state, that was extremely pro-climate and was one of the first to really implement climate policies. And so I was inspired to go work with some very smart group of folks down the street at a firm called E3, Energy and Environmental Economics, that would advise state agencies and utilities on how to plan for energy resources, but also plan for their decarbonization. One of the projects that really kind of clicked for me was a project with a state that had no climate goals, no emissions reduction incentives, and what we did for them was show them basically what would be the energy portfolio that they should invest in that would be the least expensive and offer the best rates for their customers and energy reliability. And it turned out that portfolio was a combo of solar, wind, and energy storage, which was pretty cool. And what that meant was that we had reached a point in time where these clean technologies, these climate technologies, one might call them, were ultimately the things that were cheaper and better than the incumbents. And bring that back to lower carbon, that I joined in 2020 when we were just getting started. One of our foundational partners or foundational founders is a Zubler himself, Chris Saka, who then went on to build a very successful tech fund, and then after retiring realized, okay, actually, well, climate tech is where there seems to be things to do, and I joined as one of the earliest hires with a technical background, and now we are a $2 billion climate tech fund. We invest in people and early stage companies that are doing one of three things. They're reducing greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors of the economy, so that's energy, heavy industry, built environment, transport, food and ag. Removing CO2 from the atmosphere, because basically we've already locked in a lot of the heat from the emissions, so even if we stopped emitting tomorrow, you still need to scrub a lot of that out to make the planet habitable for a lot of people. And then the last one is what we call buying more time. So the recognition that we need to evolve our systems to help the people that are already being impacted by climate change to have livable environments. And the last thing I'll say is we're a team of 28 today, and a lot of that team brings forward a combo of technical expertise, operational expertise, and investment expertise, and I think it really gives us it's allowed us to have an edge in connecting with really early stage founders and building one of the largest climate tech portfolios in the world. Thank you.
Hi. Maybe this is working. There we go.
Yes.
Abe Yokell, one of the co-founders of Congruent Ventures. The quick Congruent advertisement here is that, like my colleagues here, we do pre-seed, seed, and early Series A across the climate landscape. We are focused on North America, but our typical entry point is very early. So about 80% of the time, we are amongst the first institutional investors. We like to lead. We also really like to work with people we like to work with. So we're very happy to follow when there are other good partners around the table, which I will say as an advertisement for the whole industry, the climate world is actually very collaborative. Partly that's, I think, a result of a lack of capital over the last 15 years. And partly it's because it's self-selection, I think, for people who are interested in climate. They don't tend to be assholes. So I shouldn't say that out loud, but that's like really kind of what happens over time. I've been doing it for 20 years. So I was 13 years at one of the largest clean tech venture firms in the US in the first bubble. Bluntly, we got blown up in 2008 and never recovered. I stuck around helping to manage out the old portfolio, having opened the West Coast office from Boston. And then in 2017, starting in 2016 really, my co-founder and I pulled together Congruent with the whole thought process that we needed to reboot the cycle. Capital had left the room. GPs, venture investors had left the room because capital had left the room. There were a couple groups, and Stonley can talk about this much more elegantly than I can, but you know what he just said in my words are like, they want to invest in climate solutions, but they wouldn't admit it for a little while, because if you said you were raising a climate fund to LPs, they'd be like, I'm out of here. And so it was a very challenging time to be raising a dedicated climate fund, and that was the goal. So we went out to start specifically a climate fund that was meant to be focused on returns, but investing across climate business models. We do software, we do hardware, we do deep tech, we do tech-enabled services, just like our friends here. So we cut across. We want to make sure that the companies we invest in have a very positive impact at scale. We don't actually have a specific underwrite to the magnitude of that impact. We are very focused on just making sure that something makes sense fundamentally from a unit economic standpoint, and therefore can scale with a capitalist motivation. Returns, and that is the highest probability of having a high impact, is when you scale something that matters. I think that's a quick advertisement.
Thank you, Abe. Looking at this history is really fascinating, and I wanted to bring it back to 2024, which is at the beginning of the year, but obviously AI is still top of mind. We're having a lot of geopolitical uncertainties, climate uncertainties, and just wanted to hear your thought, and we can do reverse order for this question, is what are the mega trends you're really keeping in mind when you're looking at investments for this year?
Yeah, one of the observations over the last 20 years in the space is that it's many orders of orders separated from kind of the where the money flows. But venture firms have to raise money every 3 to 5 years. That's kind of our model. Then we deploy them for a certain period of time. Our LPs are these very large pools of capital. I think we have like $2 or $3 trillion worth of LP capital behind us generally. They move very slowly. Their time periods are different. And then you have the entrepreneurial community that actually has a very short time constant. You know, typically we'll fund something that has an 18 to 24 month between fundings. We'll do seed, somebody else will do the A, 18 months later. When you unpack those different pieces of the ecosystem, what you'll find is that the motivations are like dramatically different. And while we are fairly immune in many ways to kind of the like annual cycles of the capital markets, our companies are not. And so my biggest concern at the moment is actually a change of administration in the US. We saw, like with the IRA passing, Inflation Reduction Act, if you don't all know that, but you probably all do since you're all in the climate community. When that passed, it was like a huge gift. And we started getting calls from these LPs that were overseas that were like, basically, translation was, how do I invest more money in the US? It's like, there's such a gift being given to the climate community. How do I chase the returns here? And my great concern is not whether any damage to the IRA done is actually going to affect our companies, because mostly it won't. It will affect the capital markets. So if there's kind of a bleed out in the next 12 months, if the election goes the wrong way, in my opinion, then it's going to be a real problem for the entrepreneurial community trying to raise the next round. That's my greatest concern on the negative side. If you want to have a long-term view from a capitalist perspective, the 5 to 10 year period is going to be absolutely gangbusters for climate. We have to decarbonize the entire economy. Those companies that make it through the market gyrations in the next couple of years are going to have absolutely phenomenal outcomes. But it's not all going to be linear for the next couple of years.
Well, I'll follow on with that with a few anecdotes of companies that are, that obviously I would consider climate companies, but are ultimately just companies that are serving a need in incumbent industries. I'll highlight a portfolio company, Antora, that just raised a very significant Series B, $150 million, and they are providing basically the technology is thermal energy storage that converts electricity into heat, and that can provide things like steam, or can be converted back into electricity and serve as a means for long duration energy storage. Their first customer is a customer that has no interest whatsoever in what the carbon footprint is of their offering, but signed $100 million offtake with them because they're providing them with steam that is cheaper than the steam that they'd get from a natural gas provider or natural gas boiler. And those are the kinds of stories and trends in general that I think we want to continue to see, that I think we are going to continue to see. Another one I'll highlight, there are many, so it's hard to pick, but is a company based out of France called Yokell that has developed an electricity-driven pathway to produce the most important commodity chemical in the world, a thing called ethylene, that is typically quickly converted into something else, and basically anything that you have on you, whether it's textile or something in your bag, will contain something that has been made that has been ethylene at some point in time. And that is currently produced, 95% of it is produced by fossil fuels, but thanks to technological innovation, new materials, and declining costs in renewable electricity, they can make ethylene cheaper than the fossil fuel pathway. And it's not just about the cost in that case, it's actually about, there's a big problem with the fact that things like commodity chemicals are all made in very few locations, and that creates a lot of liability, especially as we have hurricanes and storms. In the US, 70% of that chemical is made in Texas, next to Houston, and that basically, when was it, Hurricane Irma, that shut that down for multiple days and created a huge spike in prices. And those are the kinds of things that you can de-risk with these technologies that right now we're calling climate technologies, but ultimately are just our offerings to all sectors of the economy.
Love the trend of the startup also disrupting all these traditional industries. Certainly, I think you and I discussed a little bit pathway to get away from gas and AI. What's top of mind for you this year?
Yeah, Well, I mean, broadly, there are just a number of trends. We're living in very interesting times, and I think just to back up a little bit, in addition to the transition stuff, there's still a increasingly obvious need for us to shore up our resilience and adapt to what's already sort of captured climate change, or what I sometimes call climate changed. And so, we're seeing definitely an increase in growth and demand across our portfolio that focuses on resilience. Things like one concern, which is modeling the financial mispricing of assets and companies that have not yet factored in their climate exposure, to companies like Near Space Labs doing sort of some of the ground truth information gathering around post-disaster and prep, and a number of other companies. So, mainly just speaking to the fact that I think that broadly the ship is steering towards an inescapable, well, to quote Al Gore, an inconvenient truth that we're starting to actually recognize beyond just this room and the folks who are into climate. I think broadly, obviously IRA and some of the broader climate action globally has been because of this early signal, but we're going to inescapably continue to see more innovation around resilience as one major trend. I would say on the transition side, I'm skipping ahead a little bit on questions, but I've thought about this question more than the other ones as far as like sci-fi that's influenced us, because so many different things have. And I think we built our fund on this idea that Blade Runner 2024 was the sort of future that we could avoid, where we could clearly figure out tech. We may not be able to figure out the exact winners of the tech, but and the sad thing is we can figure out tech but not figure out like living in a happy, healthy society. And could we create an alternate future where we do figure out tech and a healthy planet and all of these beneficial things for society as well? But more recently, the sort of sci-fi narrative at the Third Sphere house is The Empire Strikes Back, so Star Wars. And some people accuse us of having an existential kink, being entrepreneurs and engineers, mainly on our team, like anticipating things being hard. And as it turns out, for anyone that's been on the entrepreneurial journey, really been on that journey, you recognize that sometimes even, and especially when you're finally winning, is when it actually gets really hard. And I feel like the broader, both VC and climate ecosystem is coming up to that point where it's like, we're winning and we're right, and now the empire is going to try to strike back. And we're seeing that from oil and gas, trying to control the narrative, trying to steer the ship towards less action, delayed action, credit versus action. And so we're really fighting the rails on that in both, like the things that we're choosing to underwrite and support, but also continuing to push the success of our earlier portfolio that represents that winning, that the Jedi are winning, the Radiator Labs, or rather, I'm forgetting their new name now for some reason, but the Radiator Labs of the world, that decarbonizing the existing built environment, the future motions of the world, that are going to start releasing a whole new family of electric vehicles, and converting sort of petroleum-based solutions to electric machines that are modular and more easily distributable. That's a trend that we are seeing continuing, while also resisting sort of a lot of the money coming even into climate. That's more geared in some ways you could interpret as for delayed action versus actual action. So that I think is one of the biggest challenges. And again, of course, in the venture world, having been now 10 years in, which isn't obviously as long as 20 years, but seeing that, we're going through a cycle where venture has proven itself to make a lot of money and create a lot of change in the world, but we're coming into tough times. We can see ahead of that curve, and it's more of that empire striking back that we just have to gear up and prepare and fight that battle.
Awesome. We actually have a really good resource we'll share with you at the end about how science fiction has inspired innovation, and some good ideas you can still tap into if you haven't. Clea, did you want to react to that?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to. I love the imagery, and I was just thinking about it, given the audience. all of the announcements that we've seen around AI, and you've probably also read the headlines on how much energy that's going to require, and how fast the demand for AI is going to require energy. And I think that's it's both a little bit daunting, but also very exciting. I think both. AI is an extremely powerful tool that we need to figure out how to leverage and in the right ways. But also it can have a huge benefit for climate in how it can be used to discover new materials, discover new enzymes that can do things like make food or make chemicals. But ultimately, the trend that I want to point out is that Google, Microsoft, and all the largest AI providers are looking to climate, if you will, but they're ultimately looking to procure clean energy sources. And I think they're doing that probably because it's probably the right thing, and I'm sure maybe some of you are part of that decision making. But also I suspect because they recognize that to be resilient and to have the cheapest sources of energy, to ultimately have the cheapest sources of compute, those are the kinds of energy resources that will enable that. I work with a company that's called Panthalassa, based in Portland, Oregon, that is basically building out a swarm of energy generating devices in the middle of the ocean that don't need to be connected to the grid, which overcome a very big barrier, and to power compute. And that's just one example of the many things that I think that demand, though stark and really quick, will really catalyze in the climate space.
Can I throw one more in? Because you did ask me about AI, and I skirted that. And we are in San Francisco. I have to, sort of pay homage. But also, I'm a technologist, and again, a builder, and I recognize AI is a true transition. And the specific relevance for climate, in my opinion, is both the science elements and the new technology elements, but also specifically, like, one of the biggest challenges, and this speaks to your work, Vero, the biggest challenges of climate technology adoption is friction, whether that's cost or new behavior. And what AI has really unlocked, even for the common person, is less friction in getting stuff done when you sort of know how to use the tools right. And so what we're seeing is a lot of startups taking that to streamline processes that are otherwise barriers to either unlocking this, that, or any other element in climate adoption. Streamline is one of the companies, in fact, that we invested in that leverages AI for unlocking climate-focused grant dollars. But yeah, I think that's a major trend. It's worth acknowledging that the productivity side is huge, and because of this problem that you and I have talked about, which is like, well, how do you convince people to take action when there's a lot of self-interest or in laziness, frankly, and confusion that's a barrier to that. And then one final plug for AI is, of course, the underlying algorithms are what really has unlocked this new generation of generative AI, right? And everybody was talking about data before, and that's relevant, but it also is this major unlock of the LLM algorithms that have created this new wave of excitement and product and productivity. We are also looking at better models as part of our sort of AI strategy. We invested in a company called Rainco that has unlocked modeling things like turbulence, which touches on everything, including fluid flows, which touches on gas and oil and efficiencies and transportation efficiencies, et cetera. But that's another big, without better models, the AI can only use the ignorance we already have. And so that's another big area.
Yeah, very cool. And I know we're going to have people from Climate AI in one of the following panels, so keep your questions if you have more specific ones. You all invest in early stage startups. I'm going to aggregate some of our questions because we started late, but I had a question about what kind of growth expectation do you have? We are all very used to the tech world moving fast. It's a lot of software. I know here we have far many more moving pieces because we also have the physical world to deal with. So when you talk to founders, maybe how do you set this growth expectation? And do you have examples also of founders who've really unlocked some growth mechanism? Maybe Clea, I can hear from you.
Yeah, I know. You and I have worked on one together, which is very exciting. And I'll mention that one first. But ultimately, I think the funding landscape at the beginning probably looks a little bit different for climate tech right now. But I think that's probably going to change as we see more generalist investors start to invest in climate tech. But once you get past a certain, whether it's technological demonstration, product market fit, then the growth part of that kind of looks the same as anything else. There are a couple of examples that have very different business models that I'll highlight. One is the company that Vil and I have worked on together, a company called Breathe Batteries. They develop battery management software to make existing batteries way better without any change in chemistry, no hardware. It's just a software download effectively. And what that does is reduce charging time by 30 to 50%, double the lifetime of the battery. And why that's relevant for climate is if anybody has an EV or wants to have an EV, that ultimately increases, significantly improves the consumer experience, reduces charging time, so reduces ultimately the friction and barriers to development. And the other part is if batteries work better and you can use more of them and squeeze more out of them, you're ultimately looking to reduce waste and the emissions related to all of the materials and metals that you need to go into the batteries. So why this is relevant for growth stage is Breeze just announced a commercial deal with Volvo. That commercial deal looks very similar to a licensing deal in the semiconductor industry. Royalty-based, multi-year, fixed contract. And so those are the kinds of revenue streams that a broader set of investors start to recognize, and it doesn't really have to do with climate anymore. They might be more inclined, they might find it more exciting, but ultimately they're on a trajectory to grow with a broader capital stack as a result. Another one that I'd highlight is, and this happens, or we're kind of looking on this model a lot, and there are a lot of learnings that tend to come back to Tesla's capital stack and what they did. But ultimately what the IRA has also unlocked is a lot of funding for big demonstration plants. And once you have that, and you have offtake associated with that, it's not so different from when a financier decides to fund a solar farm project, where you're basically signing a fixed price for a fixed period of time with something called a take-or-pay contract, meaning that you have to buy it, and so it becomes underwritable by general project financiers, and then you find your contractor, etc. Point being that climate tech companies that we're working with ultimately are looking to get to the stage where they can unlock the rest of the capital stack that has been doing this for things that we don't even call climate tech anymore.
Mm. Any thought?
There's the problem with the discussion in general is that I said this earlier. Climate is eating everything. Climate is going to take over the entire economy. It's all one and the same. And so when you think about instrumenting various kinds of companies, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, they're all different. There's no kind of rinse and repeat. If you're doing a SaaS business that happens to touch climate, well, you better touch SaaS metrics. And there's a whole bunch of things that you think about. I totally agree with product market fit. Then you have to fit in the slipstream of mainstream capital. Maybe taking a big step back, the venture model in general, lots of kind of shiny objects around it. Innovation is very cool. We all like it. It is going to be a component, but in my opinion, not the most important component of solving climate. Like, we have a part to play, we're making a difference, we're not gonna solve everything. If you're using the venture model to address climate, you have to, in my opinion, fit whatever you're doing into the venture model. And that is a game of passing the baton. A lot of entrepreneurs who haven't done this before don't think in these terms, but when you think about having to raise money, if you're not a profitable business, you have to raise money between every 12 and 18 months, up to 24 months, depending on how big of a round you raised. You have to hit value inflection points every time you take capital. And the game as a founder, very bluntly, is to prove as much as you can, bring in more capital to prove things again at a higher valuation, and keep going until you have built a very large scaled capital base that doesn't need me, doesn't need us. We should be out of there over time in the success case. And then that may take 10 or 15 years, and that's totally fine. But when you think about the fundamentals of passing that baton, you have to fundamentally de-risk something with the quantum of capital you're given. Go out and do it again, go out and do it again, Go out and do it again. It takes a really long time. It is not easy. And so when we think about these like value inflection points, everybody has to be on the same page each time you do it. And the challenge is the market moves. And so the challenge when you're cutting across these different business models is kind of getting alignment with your co-founders and your investor base to make sure that everybody's aligned on what you're trying to accomplish. And then of course, you have to do it. And then every once in a while, and we're seeing this in the current market, the seed and A rounds in general in climate are actually fairly healthy. The like late A to B, in our opinion, is pretty hard. You get into scaled late stage capital, like you can find some big pools of capital out there, but there's kind of this missing middle. And unless we can appeal to the mainstream venture firms, which are still generally fine, to come in and support our collective portfolios, there is not enough dedicated climate capital to come in and actually support the entire ecosystem. And so when we think through that, like we have to make sure, even though we're doing all this esoteric work with you, what we have to figure out is how to attract mainstream capital into the space, or the community will not succeed over time.
We do have a question. I've got something to add to this, but are you taking questions?
We'll take them at the end if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, I would just add, kind of parroting a little bit. Unspoken truth about venture is that we are, the industry is itself also in the offtake business, right? It's like you invest in the vision, you invest in the early traction, which is still a lot of vision. You invest even in the early growth, which is still a lot of like, you have to believe something, right? And then eventually somebody who doesn't believe in anything other than the brass tacks puts their money in, and you say, I've succeeded because the public market believes in this. Now, obviously, there are periods of time where the public market will buy vision and overpay for that too. But when customers are willing to show up with very large pre-purchase order down payments, when government is willing to show up in the hundreds of millions of dollars to underwrite, when banks are willing to show up with hundreds of millions of dollars of credit, these are people who are generally not taking vision kind of risks. It's one badge of sort of success that venture looks for as a signal that, I believed in the vision yesterday, and now someone believes in the truth of what this company has built today. And then eventually you can draw a line from that point to an exit that is actual success in venture. What climate investing adds is this additional element that Abe pointed to, which is we have to believe in, even earlier in this vision around the need, and then also the traditional venture, typical qualifiers team, the product, go-to-market, et cetera. And at some point early in the company's life, we have to find someone else who doesn't believe in the climate stuff, but believes in the rest of the underwriting of the business. And that's success for us as well. And, we have, like I was talking about, Radiator Labs, remember their new name now, Kelvin. That's one version of success for us, which is they actually didn't do a great job of graduating from that, like believing in decarbonizing buildings with this boring radiator retrofit as an entry point to the rest of the decarbonization of the building. But they've done so much of it, and they've scaled so much in customer demand that now banks are showing up with hundreds of millions of dollars of underwriting capacity being shoved in their face, offered to them. That's a measure of success. It's not the exit yet, but they've clearly graduated and they skipped a step. They've proven they're a successful, underwritable company, that no one has to believe in anything about the prospects or even care about the environment, but there's a real business here. And then another version of success in our portfolio, which we love, is really just getting the end customer to believe in large volumes. It's typical tech or startup, right? You want to see people needing this thing so much they buy it and they tell their friends and their friends buy it. Future Motion is probably the best story I still have, which is one of my first hardware investments, and they make one-wheels, the single-wheeled electric board. You can see them anywhere in any city as a mode of electrified transportation. They have a portfolio of products they'll eventually come out with. And so, success there is literally printing, creating a money printing machine. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. Very few other VCs believed in them and still questioned them on their way up to the bank. So we also like the version of success where you just build a really big, successful company. The exit will eventually materialize. We're not worried about that. But the conviction, that gets validated is when you see the volume of customers willing to give the company money for what they're building because they actually need it. That's the ultimate success, and that doesn't differ with climate. You have to ultimately be building something that people want to pay for because it solves their problem, makes their life better, and whether or not they care about the environment, they're adopting, and that's what's going to solve climate.
Amazing. Talking about all this space, you mentioned so many startups, and thanks for sharing like concrete case studies. I was curious, is there anything you wish people were working on that you don't see that much today? So broad stroke.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give credit to my colleague Miela for reminding me that, and panel coaching me, things like, Future Motion and Kelvin are great examples of what we can always want to see more of, which is modular, a new way to think about infrastructure, modular, distributed, either looks like or could be or is a consumer device, benefiting from all of those sort of growth and distribution benefits once you get economies of scale and size and distribution down packed. And it's not the sexy exotic science that a lot of climate tech is anchored on, and we need those too, but we need stuff that decarbonizes the billions, and this is borrowed from lower carbon a little bit, the early messaging of lower carbon, billions of machines out there that need to decarbonize, that need to go to electric. And we love to see more and more things that are that are like more containerized, modularized, smaller, distributed infrastructure. I can never see enough of those things. We have a company, one of our most recent investments, doing an area that we didn't think we would invest in anymore, but they happened to build a smaller, modular, more distributed version of it. A Dutch line in town from the Netherlands, doing greenhouses that are more distributable urban vertical farms. So
Next year we need more show and tell.
Yeah.
I guess part of that. Anything else? So I also want to ask about talents, and I'll go to you, Abe, because you mentioned the climate is eating the world, which is a beautiful one, but also some specific things that candidates or people new to the space need to think about. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think somebody else had some recommendations on specific resources, but if you're out looking for something, I would plugging what was just said. The venture model in general works really well when, again, that quantum of capital is like 10 to 20 max to figure something out, or you're doing something so big that you can attract $100 million without having any proof points. Those are the two modes. Don't get stuck in the middle. Don't do something that takes $100 million and isn't going to be that big of a deal, because you're going to have a really tough time. When you think about your own personal, selves moving into climate, if you're not there already, thinking about first principles for founding a company, always a good idea, but I would encourage you to really, really dig deep on the industries in which you're operating. There's a lot of bodies buried across all of these industries, and it looks like on the outside things are really stupid. They're being done for a reason. The classic example on that is like utilities, which I think you're going to talk about next. It's a reason that they operate the way they do. So either go first principles and think about the industries, or go hit all our jobs pages. It's like, I think we have 2,300 jobs that we were a small part in helping to create across the portfolio. I think we have something like 300 jobs posted. There are many more that are not posted. I think lower carbon, I think everybody actually has their own jobs board.
Yeah.
We all want you to go work with our portfolio companies.
Love it.
So please go hit them. We all need it. And I will tell you that regardless of whether you're in marketing, whether you're a software engineer, whether you're working on foundational models, there's a role for you in climate. You just need to find it. You don't need to be a subject matter expert. There are many companies out there where you can apply your own skill set.
Yeah, that was my question for Clea when I met her. Like, you're a scientist, that makes sense, you go to climate, but those of us who are not, and I think there's still a lot of transferable skills, right?
Yeah, 100%. And especially when you go back to the question around what is the growth strategy for a climate company, or what we're calling climate tech company. At some point, these all need the same thing. You need a chief operating officer, you need a CMO in a lot of cases, a CIO, a CFO, you name it, and I'm sure that lots of you have a lot of those skills. And yeah, go check out our jobs boards. I would also, a little plug for Climate Draft. It's a pool of folks that are looking into climate, and a lot of our portfolio companies, and well, not just our portfolio companies, climate tech companies at large, go and look for talent on there. Yeah, and so there's really a role for everyone, because, like I said, climate tech, or like we've all said, climate tech companies, it may sound like they're that at the beginning, but ultimately the real success comes from the fact that they just become companies that are providing a product that is obvious, and that will eventually graduate to a capital stack that is far better than ours, and with lots of opportunity.
I'll just add selfish plug a little bit. But also it would be crime not to mention Climate Base. They're a portfolio company of ours. They are the creators and organizers of San Francisco Climate Week. And they are, in my opinion, the best climate jobs board out there. So shout out to Climate Base for what they've been able to do with Climate Week. But they're a climate startup themselves that do a lot of training, fellowship kind of programming, but also a lot of job placement and job board. So check them out, climatebase.org, and then of course jobs.thirdsphere.com as well.
I think all our companies also use Climate Base, so it's kind of all. I have to plug. I think we have four of our CEOs, one who got pulled into jury duty, but we're really excited to be able to support this community, and it's worked out, well for us as well. Eitan, who I think was on the panel earlier, is here. I see Merritt hiding in the back. I think he's on another panel. Tyler may not be here yet. Anyhow, he's here too, and hopefully, if you're interested, I think all of them are hiring. I'm so sorry, but you should go chat with all of them.
This is such a refreshing message when we see all these layoffs and we have this pool of talent that's ready for you. So amazing. I'll just wrap up. I know we're a little bit behind schedule. Last question. 3 years from now, imagining we're in this room or a bigger one, probably an amphitheater at that point. What does the world look like if we're all successful?
Well, every single one of you have either started a climate tech company or are working at a climate tech company. That's what success looks like for me.
Most jobs are climate jobs, and where you haven't blown past the 1.5 degrees, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to borrow from the Matrix this time. If we're all wildly successful in 3 years, there is no spoon. There's no such thing as a climate job. Absolutely every single job has an anchor towards climate, and if we're wildly successful, we've solved most of the climate problems, and we're all just basking in a wonderful, much better world, and just shepherding that.
Amazing. Thank you, Vice Panel. So, Mark, can we take any questions from the room, or should we just take a break? And I know we're a bit behind.
Let's take 2.
2 questions. Okay.
I want to say 0.
I think we have. Can you be succinct?
Yes.
Okay.
So taking a lot of the innovation we have over to less developed economies has been a challenge. A lot of the board members, including myself, just say, hey, focus on the big markets, America, Europe. In 5 years, we'll get to Japan. In 8 years, we'll get to Vietnam, Indonesia. But given this group global problem of emissions, a lot of it's coming from Asia, how do we get these companies out there? Because I'm working with sovereign wealth funds, doing a fund, and the question is, like, are we going to get the San Francisco guys to cooperate and help us?
And please repeat the question. So.
Yeah. So how do we get these companies to work all around the world where the biggest sources of emissions are coming? 100%. That is the number one thing that we should be focusing on. And the way that I answer that question is. There are maybe, if we're lucky, like 100 million of us that can afford to pay for the thing that's organic or like a little bit better. Maybe you press that button on when you book your flight and you feel like you offset your emissions or something. But really the greatest impact comes from the 7.8 billion others for whom the climate choice or the clean choice just needs to be the affordable and accessible choice. And that's why I'm just going to come back to this narrative. We are investing in companies that are developing products, services that are cheaper, better, and faster, tastier, have more resilient supply chains than the incumbents. And they are good for the environment. So that's how I want to make sure that's how I think that ultimately these offerings become global. They have to.
I'll just quickly add that a lot of the barriers there, it's not a lack of interest in large markets like China and India. There's a lot of geopolitical barriers, of course, and local market competition from a capital perspective. Probably not scalable to repeat what we did. When we see a problem that we can't directly solve ourselves with our fund, we usually seed a team to go work on that problem and then let them go off and be free. We have a extension of our firm that we don't really talk about called Urban Gateway that works out of Hong Kong, commercializing US technology into that side of the world, I'll just broadly say. Not connected to our firm officially anymore, but we recognized this need, but challenge and barrier, and we did something about it, and hopefully there's more action like that, commercialization of decarbonization into these large growing markets.
All right. I want to be respectful of the time of everybody. Thank you so much for this amazing panel and spending time with us. Let us know how the community can be helpful to you. We heard loud and clear. Talent. Anything else we can do?
More LPs?
More LPs, yes, yeah.
There's also lots of, if you don't want to go to a startup or VC, there's also lots of other things that you can do. There's a lot of education and community building that, I mean, this is already great, but more of it certainly needs to happen. There are lots of things that are quite topical. I didn't say anything about fusion, so if you happen to want to talk about that, come to me. And there are a lot of other things that are a little bit more niche that require the really smart folks like you all to have interest in and want to go spend some time on and bring people together. So thanks for making it out here in the first place.
Thank you so much. And we'll take just 5, if that's okay. And feel free to find Stoney, Clea, and Abe if you have any question for them, but also let them go. Really our pleasure to host you today. Thank you.